next slide, you'll see what it looks like in a, I don't know where it's being live streamed. Yep. So the next one, obviously that's at that font size and that scale on your screen. You can't read the detail of it, but on the website, you can zoom in and see, for example, that first of all, the first thing you see is that we're in the middle of a very complex planning environment. The light blue at the top, those are all the things that are coming in by way of national direction. The orange is our strategic planning, including our town center and structure plans. The purple stuff is our district plan changes. And then further down, we have things we won't be talking about so much today, like the long-term plan, some of our LGA policies and bylaws, et cetera. But again, the key here is that we're right in the thick of a complex planning environment. The other thing is that it changes quite quickly. While the arrow has us, you are here. If we go into the detail, we'll see that some things this is already out of date, even though it's only from a few months ago. Some things that have changed are the central government timelines around things like their national policy statements. They've obviously introduced this new bill, which we didn't know about in July, and our own PDP, proposed district plan decision timelines, have shifted from this September to coming January. So it's just to show how dynamic an environment this is. Next slide, please. So what Donna and Sandra will take you through today is an update on the work program, how it relates to those things, the national direction, but importantly, not just what we're being told we must do by central government, but what we want to do, what our understanding is of what council wants to do in terms of implementing council's own growth and economic development strategy, Waikato 2070, progressing council's vision in a number of other ways, including through community blueprints. Landing the proposed district plan, of course, is very critical, and we can't take that for granted. And then our initial thinking, or our continued thinking around priorities for future district plan variations, which we can start working on and notifying once the PDP is landed. And then, of course, allowing questions for you, from you, and for you. We do have a couple of questions we'll pose to you, but of course, I'm happy to answer questions as well. So the 90 minutes should give us plenty of time to do that, because we've only got roughly 15 slides, and I've done a few of them. So I'll hand over to Donna now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to take you through some of the things we are working on in order to implement Waikato 2070, our growth and economic development strategy. At the moment, we're focusing on 3 primary areas: determining if structure planning is required for each of those growth cells identified in the strategy, which ones we might be able to combine and do collectively to save on resources and time, which ones will need to be council-led, and which ones could be developer-led. We're having continuous discussions across the business and with Watercare to ensure a coordinated approach for timing land, by which I mean strategic land purchase, facilities planning, and infrastructure planning for each of the growth cells identified in Waikato 2070. We're also working on implementing the existing town centre development plans that are in the strategy. We've got 2 for Huntly and Pokeno, and then this financial year we have budget for the creation of the town centre plan for Ngāruawāhia. So we plan to start that early in the new year. Some other examples of projects that tie into Waikato 2070 implementation. We're working at the moment on engaging an urban designer, and they'll do a visual representation of what the Pokeno CBD could look like once fully developed. This is really closely linked to all of our capital works projects that we have budgeted for this LTP. There's roading projects, open space projects, the community hub, and of course the market square. We're in discussions with local mana whenua and Huntly at the moment to assist them with their housing aspirations. We're working collectively with other key stakeholders in Huntly to deliver housing and development with good social outcomes. And some examples of those key stakeholders are Kainga Ora and KiwiRail. This is part of Huntly being identified as a priority development area under Future Proof. We're also having discussions with a local developer in Ngaruawahia who wants to do development on an anchor site in the CBD. So there's lots happening, and this is just an example of three of those. But there's a lot going on across the district, across all 6 of our major towns and some of our villages. And so it's about linking all of those conversations and discussions together, because collectively they deliver on the outcomes identified in Waikato 2070. Some other work happening in the strategic space is that we did an issues and options paper to look at the affordable housing issues in the Waikato. This was a joint paper developed with Hamilton City Council and Waipa District Council. Delivering affordable housing is one of the things we need to address under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. So in November, there'll be a report coming to Policy and Regulatory Committee to give you an update on what that paper was about and what it includes. We're also progressing work on the conservation strategy with the steering group, and we're hoping to secure a workshop prior to Christmas so that we can update you all with what is happening in that space and our timeline moving forward. And of course, we had intended to complete local area blueprints for Goodington and Port Waikato. They were scheduled to be done this month, but unfortunately COVID has put a spanner in the works there. We know that those sessions with COBIS in person in the community are really meaningful. And that's how you get the most out of everyone in the room. So we're hoping we might be able to do those early in the new year, pending what happens in the COVID space. We are catching up with COBIS this week to discuss what it might look like if we are unable to hold workshops in person in our communities. So we'll keep you posted on that. I'm going to hand over to Sandra now, who'll just touch on what's happening in our district plan space.
Hey everyone, thank you, Donna. Okay, so in the RM policy team, we are busy working our way through getting ready for decisions, etc. But first off, we've got one of our team who's working on the Ohaniwai appeal, and if you remember, the Ohaniwai decision was released in May of this year, earlier than the remaining part of the PDP. So currently working toward a resolution on those 4 Ohaniwai appeals with the appellants. We have regular briefings with the PDP subcommittee, and there will be a report that will come to policy and regulatory once some of the appeals have been resolved and consent orders have been prepared. As it says here, the decision is now being released on the 17th of January, so the team are busy working through preparing for the decision. We have an implementation plan that has been drafted, and there will be a whole lot of arms and legs that go with releasing the decision, media releases, public notices, workshops for internal staff, workshops with councillors, just to give you an idea of what the new plan looks like, because remembering it's actually coming out in a completely new format. So a lot of work going on with that. So once the decision is released, there's an appeal period, which is for 30 working days. And so the appeals close on the 2nd of March. And once they close, the team will work on summarising and determining which plan provisions each of the appeal points relate to. We've got a fixed term resources that will be engaged for the over 2 years to assist with the appeals. And we will continue to work with appellants to resolve those appeals as quickly and efficiently as possible. Just a couple of other things. We're looking at a new e-planning software tool. Our current e-plan is now out of date, so it's sort of near end of life, so we're looking at that. And one, of course, that will fit with the new National Planning Standards format. And
Sandra, I just would like to add, just so the councillors are aware, if something isn't appealed on, if there's part of the plan that isn't appealed on at all, then the consents team can go ahead and put more weight on that provision, provided that it's not tied up or linked in any way to some other provision that is under appeal. And those of you who have been involved in district plan reviews before may be aware that the council can actually officially resolve to make some parts of the plan operative when they are beyond appeal. But even without that, the consents team can give weight to it. So it's a really important milestone on the 2nd of March, knowing kind of what's safe, as it were, and then what's still the bone of contention for at least some parties. Thanks, Sandra.
thanks, Jim. And that's all I've got on that slide. So next slide. Okay, so I'll talk to part of this slide and I'll get Donna to assist with some of the slide as well. So back in 2000, between the years of 2014 and 2017, we were busy developing the plan for notification, which we did in July 2018. And there's a huge amount of change since that time, especially in our district. So we still need to release the plan as per the decision, as per the direction, but there's a whole lot of work that we need to look at to move forward. So Donna, can I just hand this part on to you now, please?
Sure. So the next few slides that we're going to cover will give you an idea of our thinking, and that's what we'd like your feedback on today, of where to next for the district plan. And so things that have been happening since we notified the plan. We know that we have a continuous stream of residential, commercial and industrial development in the district. And an example is when we notified the plan in 2018, there were a couple of anchor sites on the industrial land in Pocono. Now we're lucky if we've got one site left for development. We've also done the development and adoption of our blueprints. We've developed and adopted our growth and economic development strategy. We did the Hamilton to Auckland corridor work with our key partners. There's been the new national policy statement on urban development. We've had an update to the future-proof strategy, and the draft is out for consultation at the moment. And then, of course, there's the enabling housing supply bill, which is hot off the press, and I'll cover that off later on in our slides to get your ideas and feedback on what's happening in that space. Did you want me to continue, Sandra?
No, I can do this one, Donna, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the different types of proposed variations or potential variations that we will be looking at. So the next 4 slides will cover that off. So there's a mix of drivers for each of the variations. So strategically important to deliver on Waikato 2070. So that's been identified as being strategically important for the district. Then there's organisational priority to address other external and internal concerns. So it's been recognised by us as a priority to address community feedback, concerns, and then compliance with national direction. So that's the things that we have to do. So each of these variations could be either district-wide or discrete to a particular area or topic in the plan. And we're still waiting on national direction for the MPS on highly productive land and Indigenous biodiversity. Next slide, please, Donna. So the timing and resourcing of each of the variations is still yet to sort of be determined. And most of it will take place after the PDP decision has been released. And the scale of it also will be determined once the plan is released, as the decision may deliver on some of the outcomes that have been identified. And as an example, we had hearings on future urban zone and medium density zones. So if the decision is in favour of these, we may not need to do some of these variations. And also we need to remember that the number and scope of appeals might shape how much resource we have also to focus on the variations, as well as the topics that are subject to appeal. So next slide, I think might be you, Donna.
Okay, so each of the potential variations were given a priority scoring, and this was based on a variety of factors, such as whether it was a deadline trying to meet national direction, or we saw it as something that needed to be addressed relatively quickly because we had a limited scope before development came in the door. And so once I run through these, we'll be able to have a discussion about whether the priority orders we think you might like it to be, or whether we could whether we need to change it. So first up, we've got the minimum housing targets. These are a requirement to meet the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. It's a non-statutory process, so that means that we put the targets into the district plan and it doesn't go through the Schedule 1 RMA process. So no opportunity for anyone to submit on those provisions. They're going to go into our operative district plan, both the Waikato section and the Franklin section. So we'll be bringing a paper to the November Policy and Regulatory Committee outlining this. We've already sent a paper to the commissioners to include the new targets into the proposed district plan. We've got the Pocono Town Centre work. So this is linked to the urban design work that I mentioned earlier. It might mean that we need to change our plan provisions to make sure that we deliver on everything that we need to. Since the plan provisions were written, we also know that we've updated our catchment management plan. And so that has an impact on the Pocono Town Centre. So we're working through to see if we need to change plan provisions to ensure that we deliver a great town centre while also meeting the catchment management plan work that's being done. We've got some urban design controls currently in the proposed district plan. Since that time, the MPS on urban development came out. So that has some very specific policies on urban design and amenity. So it will be dependent on the decision, but we'll be looking to see if we meet our MPS UD requirements. We've got a technical mock-up, and this is a standard variation that resolves inconsistencies, gaps, unintended consequences that arise from the proposed district plan hearings decisions. You might remember that Susan Chibnall came to and presented to you previously on some of the things that we'd like to address in the proposed district plan. So that included provisions, and then I think she presented a couple of spot zoning tidy ups as well. So this is where those would fall. Then we've got to meet our JMA requirements. There might be some priorities that Waikato Tainui would like to address. So that's projects, we've captured those as priority 1 to ensure that we deliver and meet our JMA responsibilities.
Donna, just on that mop-up, it's just important to note there that this is despite the commissioner's best efforts, right? So in some cases, they just haven't had scope within the submissions to deal with something that they have flagged as something that needs to be dealt with. So this is our opportunity, that variation. And then secondly, as the consent planners start using the new plan, inevitably they'll find something in the wiring of the district plan or the terminology or something that could benefit from a quick, low-hanging fruit type improvement. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah. Things that got classed under recommended priority 2 was the development of a medium density residential zone, and this would be located close to retail, open space and public transport. Also helps deliver on our requirements in the NPS urban development. As Sandra mentioned, this is one of the topics that there was a hearing on, so we'll be awaiting the Commissioner's decision on the plan to see if that's something that ends up in our district plan. We've got here the rezoning of land that has been identified for development in Waikato 2070 in the 1 to 10 year time frame. So anything that is signalled in Waikato 2070 in 1 to 10 years and is not appropriately zoned in the district plan, we will need to address this by changing the zoning. And we know that we need this land to meet our housing and employment land requirements under the NPSUD. We've got amendments to the business and industrial zone spatial extents to ensure that we have adequate land supply for employment within close proximity to residential land. So this is linked to the above, and they could be done jointly together to make sure that we do have sufficient employment land. Incorporating the design controls into the district plan. So priority 1 is to review those design controls to make sure they're fit for purpose, and then this is the next step where we incorporate them into the district plan to ensure that we have some teeth so that we can enforce them when our resource consent applications come in. Recommended priority 3 items was an update to business zone provisions to manage outcomes. We've identified some gaps in the business zone provisions in the proposed district plan. These gaps may actually be addressed as part of the decision on the plan, but we've just flagged that as something to make sure that we are aware of. There's also the consideration of perhaps a 3rd industrial zone. So when we developed Waikato 2070, Derek Kemp, our economist, did a lot of work around the employment land throughout our district. And you might remember that Taupiri was identified as a clean air or clean industry. And so if we wanted to put that into our district plan, we'd need to make sure that we had adequate provisions that ensured that the right activity takes place in that area. We've got blueprint integration, which facilitates capital and community projects. So there might be some communities that need a change in zoning or a change in plan provisions so that we can deliver on their identified project in the local area blueprints.
Can I just say on that, Donna, that a lot of the blueprint initiatives were about matching or understanding and matching demand and supply around commercial, industrial, residential land. That has largely been done as much as possible through the work that Donna and Mark Davey and other people have done feeding into the Section 42A reports on the rezoning requests. So we've done as much as we can there, but there's still possibly room, particularly around these capital and community projects to if there's a zoning change required. So I just wanted to highlight that a lot of the blueprint, we've tried to do as much blueprint integration as possible within the scope of the PDP.
Yeah. And then recommended priority number 4, we've got the incorporation of a future urban zone. And this would cover growth cells identified in Waikato 2070 beyond the 10-year timeframe. Also, Sandra mentioned that we did have a hearing on a potential future urban zone. So this might be something that the plan delivers on, but it might be only for a couple of areas, and we need to make sure that we secure our land that we've identified in the strategy for that 10 years and beyond. And then we've got the addition of a second reserves or open space zone. At present, the proposed district plan only has 1 reserves zoning. And so this is the zone that has to be used for your local neighbourhood playground, your huge sports fields and sports pavilions, as well as your walkway, open space and drainage areas. So it's hard to write provisions when you've got a variety of activities taking place. Most councils have more than 1 green zone. So eventually we'd like to have more than 1 in our district plan. So now we've definitely got lots of time for questions. Does the priority order make sense? What's missing from the list? Is there something on the list that you think shouldn't be there? And what other questions do you have for us to answer?
Thank you, Donna. Jim, have you got any more to round up while Sandra or whoever's got the screen takes that down, please?
Just noting that we do have another slide once we get through this discussion. If there's time and interest, we are prepared to talk about this new bill that came through last week and early implications around that, but we just want to make sure we don't lose the thread of what we've just talked about.
I think there's a fair bit to talk about here, and I'm just trying to think how long is it till it's dark tonight. All right, take the screen down, please. Donna's looking busy, so I'm picking it was her that had it up there. Well done, Donna. Hey, look, just a few things. Firstly, I'll just go back to your recommended priorities in 2. And look, and firstly, you know, I think most of you would have heard me say some time ago that you would never go about doing a full-blown district plan review again. It's just too long, too costly and that. So you know, I think we did the right thing by doing it because we had 2 district plans, and probably the only way you were ever really going to get it close to right was to do what we did. But going forward in the future, I think it will be a series of variations. I think the thing is here, what this identifies for me, we need to identify what those variations are and actually start moving in a timely fashion to deal with them instead of just sitting there and letting time slide by while the district plan appeals are actually dealt with. I think we need to get on as been identified. I just looked at in relation to the rezoning of land identified for development in the Waikato 2070 in the 10 to 12 year time frame. Probably a couple of questions there. First one is, and is Michelle on the line, or no, probably not. Jim, you might be able to answer this. How does this sit though in relation to out of sequencing planning with future-proof partners?
You mean the beyond the 10 years?
No, within the 10 years.
Within the 10 years. Well, and we essentially within the future-proof forum, we have to, and according to the NPSUD, we have to allow for consideration of the out of sequence. So this, what we've put here as priority 2 is programming in what the council has signaled is in sequence, so to speak, what we know about. But if we consider something that comes in and council and with its future-proof partners agrees to add something to the list, then yeah, then if it's within that time frame, then it needs to if possible, join this group.
Because the thing that worries me is, you know, from when we started the district plan to even when we were notified to even it being heard last year, the world has moved on so much. And I always said by the time you implement it, even though we're from March, I think we've got 2 years to complete the appeals, which is a big stretch to say the least, based on past experience. It just worries me that if we don't identify some of these sites from conversations that I think with organisations that have already come to us looking to either expand or land in the Waikato, and I'm talking about manufacturing. I think on the coattails of what's happened to the Henawai with the Comfort Group, it's certainly motivated a lot of other industry to look pretty hard in the Waikato at the moment. So I don't know how to handle that in relation to a case-by-case basis. If somebody came into the district and wanted a 20 or 30 hectare site to put up manufacturing, why do we do that? Just, I know variations, we can bunch a whole lot together, like a shopping basket, and deal with it in one go, but what happens to the one-offs? Are they still a variation, or are they a structure plan?
We have a number of options around that. We can do whatever is needed, essentially. So again, the future-proof strategy, which is out for consultation, allows for us to fold that into the council's thinking. And then not only can future-proof be amended, potentially based on that, but we can and will go back to the Waikato 2070 document as soon as we can to amend that, and then that can flow through. So whether it can be packaged up or has to proceed separately, it'll depend on the importance and priority, et cetera. I just wonder if Donna had any further response on that, because both Donna and I are involved in the Future Proof work program in terms of the work streams on priority development areas and planning and policy. So you were well across it, Donna.
I think just a note that if we get a development proposal that's for an area that's not identified in Waikato 2070 or Future Proof strategy, then there is that out of sequence development process that has to be followed, and that also sits in the RPS. But if the development has merits, then there's no reason why it wouldn't pass that test. It's just that the developer needs to demonstrate how their development will benefit our communities. Okay,
no, that's right. I just needed to understand how that could come about, because I just have a distinct feeling that we are likely to be more firmed up approaches in the next 12 to 18 months as to those opportunities. And I think what we're seeing happening in Auckland is probably even making more manufacturing thinking about getting out of the place. So yeah. Hey, look, I'll go to the hands up here. It's Councillor Eyre.
Thank you. Look, my question is, and in fact, I don't entirely know how to articulate my question, but we've recently seen in our capital valuations significant increases on blocks of rural land that hold multiple titles. And given that farming is becoming increasingly frustrating for a number of rural landowners, I can predict that you're going to potentially have those rural people wanting to open up those titles for development. How are we front-footing that? Like, will that just essentially be under a private plan change? How is that going to be factored into our planning long term?
Just one comment on that. I think in terms of front-footing it, it depends on what you want to and what way you want to front-foot it. From a policy standpoint, both our growth strategy and our district plan front-foot it in the sense that they try to stop just the willy-nilly subdivision of rural land, while allowing for a reasonable level of it, but less so than in the past. So there's that front-footing. I suppose in terms of anticipating greater demand and trying to accommodate that, it would depend on whether that's a shift in council's policy position, whether council actually wants to be more sympathetic and allow for that. But from a strategic planning point of view, the recent view of council has been to allow for quite a limited amount of rural subdivision. It all comes down to minimum lot sizes, et cetera.
I think there's a number of other anchors there too, Jim, that have been created around, I think it was PC6, that actually made life more difficult. I think as an outcome of the district plan review, there's likely to be a minimal grandparent lot size of 40 hectares, I would say, depending on how the commissioners feel about that. Even though council had a different position, I seem to think that that's could be a likely outcome of that. And there's a number of other things that actually prohibit rural people from doing willy-nilly developments in a way that already sit within the district plan. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, 3 issues, sir. Just following up on what Councillor Harris said, I was one of those who suffered from having multiple titles, close proximity to Hamilton, yet I'm not allowed to subdivide. But if, and I've had the discussions with whatever it is, the valuation people, and they say that we are being rated on highest and best use, and the highest and best use is to subdivide and develop. And if I can't benefit from that, why am I being rated for that? And that's totally inequitable. I'll leave that statement alone and move forward. I am concerned, as I have expressed previously on these communications, we were talking about development in certain areas, and we've got developers on the line, and I'm talking particularly about Taupiri. I am nervous about discussing such matters, and when people are online and able to get insight. So it's over to them whether they leave or not. But as far as the development of Taupiri and the clean air, I think it was prioritised as in the 3rd tier. My concern is in such a situation, which we identified in the blueprints, was that if you don't act early and you acknowledge what you're going to do, such as we've had at Te Kaupō when the land was valued at 300,000 and we're now being asked for 5 million for a sports playground 7 years later, because we told everybody what we were going to do, and including the owners, then we run some huge risks of actually being able to achieve what we foresee. So to delay that type of thing. So anyway, 3 issues there, and I'm pretty sincere on all 3. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
When do I get a rebate on my my rates?
No, because I think a lot of us have got the same situation. Hey, you're a decision maker. Wouldn't be seen right to give us ourselves a
My decision is to rebate. Yep, thanks.
Talk to your local councillor.
Yeah, talk your local councillor. Councillor Lynch.
Bishop, you make some really good points, Noel, actually, and I support what you've said. And Alan, you made some good points earlier on too. What I would like to point out is that I would be interested in better information on the proposals for Laura and other developers in this urban development thing and the plan that staff are proposing. I'd just like to be kept update with things and just like to know a little bit more about what's going on. I know Kaingaora has something like 200 sections in Hay. So I am interested in knowing how this is going to be developed. Thank you.
Councillor Lynch, would you like that in this workshop? Would you like Donna to expand a little bit on what she said earlier, or would you be looking for an opportunity outside of this workshop to get into the detail a bit more?
I would prefer it outside the workshop. If you don't mind, it would be easier for you to explain to me.
Happy to do that.
All right. Anyone else got any questions, or as I said, have we got it right or not?
Well, could I just ask for a question on that priority 3 for the Taupiri clean air? We did a lot of work on this, and it was the only area in the Waikato district and in the sub-region that wasn't affected by other industry, and the likes of pharmaceuticals and the likes. It is a pretty special area around the south of Taupiri Mountain through to Ngaruawahia and to the east there. That is the only option for clean air, and people can't develop that in Auckland anymore. And when you talk about opportunities coming south out of Auckland, if we've got pharmaceutical, and you've got companies here in New Zealand that are capable of vaccines and the likes, Wallaceville and Upper Hutt, to me, are we being short-sighted and putting that rezoning or an overlay there of some sort to protect or to keep dirty industries or toxic industries out of that area. I certainly think we should develop this, please.
Well, before what Jim thinks of an answer, I'll give you what I think. If we were to do a clean area, what do you call it, clean air industrial area in Taupo, I'm just saying if we were, I think you would actually put parameters around the zoning of it that only allowed certain styles of manufacturing or whatever we're talking about putting in there to actually maintain the ethos of what you're trying to achieve. I would assume that's what you would do. Maybe Jim's got a different view.
No, I don't have a different view on it. It depends on what council wants. I mean, they can be as, as long as we tie them to environmental effects, we can try to be as targeted as possible around things. But, it is worded as consider an industrial zone that would look into it and explore more fully. So this is an initial look at things, and we can come back with more detailed issues and options before we obviously have the detailed text of the proposed change, including these priorities. These priority levels could well change based on the PDP decisions, as we've said earlier. Donna, did you want to say any more about the industrial?
I think I'd just make a comment that yes, we could certainly consider another zone and provisions that deliver on the type of activity we want to locate there. Air discharge is actually a thing under the regional plan, and so we would have to go away and do some investigative work to make sure that the provisions our plan that we want to deliver on is in some way linked, because clean air area for development is directly linked to air discharge, and that's something that we don't have the responsibility to manage, but certainly something that we're going to be investigating a lot and working with the regional council on to make sure that if we decide that a third industrial zone to deliver that type of activity is what we want, that we're able to do that.
So if I can just jump in, Alan, the issue for me was that it's not about getting to creating the zone, it's about preventing in the interim, to make sure that if we decide to, we can, because once something we've allowed in there is dirty, you've lost the opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's why I referred to, if it was done, it would have some strict rules around it, around air discharge type scenario. I don't know how you do that, but there's obviously a way of protecting that through the regional plan in some form.
Yeah. So we would need to do that work up front prior to any rezoning, so that Councillor Smith has mentioned we don't end up with a generic industrial zone and then get an activity occurring that means that our clean air area is no longer as intended. So yeah, one of the ways we could protect that area is that it's identified perhaps as a future urban zone. And by urban, when I say that, urban doesn't just mean residential, it also means a future employment zone. So that could be an option to protect the land.
You'd almost have to, before I go to the next speaker, you'd almost need to do something in conjunction with a developer or the landowner to actually get the outcome you're looking for. Because if somebody turns up with a private plan change, it's going to be hard to control it from that point. Councillor Sedgwick.
Thank you. I'm not going to make any comment on the district plan or decisions that may have arisen from it, but two points. Te Kaupara is also potentially a clean air area, and to the point raised earlier by Councillor Eyre, there are a number of instruments that and the Mayor has referred to several of them, in terms of rural land, and the rural land under the high quality soils is something that has been on our minds, particularly through the hearings, and that's something that is a government instrument, if you like. So it specifically requires us to keep ourselves as I think as Councillor Lynch referred to earlier, the food bowl area. So I hope that helps.
Right, thank you. Councillor Wilton.
Thank you. Just under enabling housing, supply and other matters, announced 19th October 21. You mentioned 3 dwellings, 3 stories high. Is that urban only or is that per title? As in rural?
We're going to cover that on the next slide, so I can go into a bit more detail on that once.
Sorry, I've jumped ahead.
Yeah.
Save your question.
And yeah, okay. And then just with the clean air, one point would be sprays, just with spray drift and certain things like that, because there's some maize blocks and one thing and another that are handy to that, and just so that needs to be, which is already existing. It's allowed, and it'd be interesting to know how that would affect clean air and what the rules are around there before we get too involved in a situation that might stop activities that are already up and about.
Okay, good point. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look, I support the minimum housing targets, review of urban design controls to deliver on urban development, and to some extent Waikato Taonui aspirations, which are all in that housing space. So I agree with that being first priority, and I just urge, I guess, when you come back to us with some targets, that we think about that, the housing initiative around affordable housing, so that we actually don't just do enough to meet our obligations to Crown, but we actually think about the commitments we've made to that regional housing initiative that go beyond really our obligations to statutory obligations. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Councillor Patterson, welcome
Yes.
back.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question for Jim or Donna. Previously, when we talked about, so if we just go back to, say, the Taupiri discussion, if previously we talked about clean industry, so you've been mentioning clean air and air discharge. In our previous discussions, it was talked about clean industry or green manufacturing. So is there a difference between what you're saying about air discharge and green industry? Because to me, they're 2 different things.
Donna, I'll let you handle that. That relates to the Waikato 2070 discussion.
Yeah, so that you're right, they are 2 different things. So clean air industry is the type of industry, and it's discharge to air or water. Green industry is industry that's might be operating under a full recycle model, where inputs in are net or neutral to inputs out. We don't have any provisions for development like that, but they should be able to operate readily under our existing industrial provisions. So they could be located anywhere in our district. And we get conversations from developers who are looking at doing sites like that quite frequently, but we've not had anyone take up any development in our district yet that operates on a clean industry model.
I suggest that most developers are wanting to, they put their neck on the line, I would say, and their money, are wanting to get a return faster rather than later. And probably it would take somebody with a fair bit of depth in their pocket to sit around and wait for clean industry to turn up. Let's put it that way. That's probably one of the issues.
Right, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think what we'll find is once we get sort of an anchor tenant, so to speak, anywhere in the district around clean industry, we'll find that that'll provide some marketing advantages to potential neighbors, and you start seeing these clusters evolve once someone takes the plunge, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly right. Right, Councillor Maguire. Take yourself off mute and repeat what you just said.
Page 17, enabling housing supply amendment bill. My biggest concern with 3 dwellings and 3 stories per side, parking. Are we pushing this parking one, or
That's the next presentation, councillor. So we'll deal with that when we get to that one.
oh, sorry.
That's all right. Has anyone else got any questions at all for Donna or Jim at this stage with what we've seen? It doesn't seem to be anybody disagreeing with the priorities here that I can see anyway. So Councillor Church.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just my question is really around some of the timelines of because we've got an inordinate amount of work to do as usual. So how confident are we in terms of the workload and the prioritisation and then delivery?
Great question through you, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like to just say a couple words on that. We did emphasize in the slideshow that landing the PDP is a top priority, and it's something we really can't take for granted. So while we are thinking about a lot of these topics already and starting to do some initial work, we're trying to manage expectations around when those come through to council to be notified. At the moment, we have some vacancies, just natural turnover in the planning world, and some of those vacancies are within the 2 teams doing this work at the moment. So that's one reason why, rather than we were thinking about bringing a report to Policy and Regulatory Committee this month to endorse this program and move forward. We think that based on the discussion today, we don't necessarily need that, and in fact, it'd be better to wait a little bit longer and see where the PDP lands and also the resourcing at that time, and then be able to commit to some very specific timeframes around that, so you can go to your communities and say this is what's coming when. If you're happy with that as an approach, we'll just keep these as the general priority groupings, and you have an understanding of what those priorities are. Does that help answer the question, Councillor Church?
Yes, thank you. It does. But
One thing we're short of is time and resources, Jim, and I think it's a problem that's going to bug us for some considerable time, excuse the pun, but and I don't know how we'll ever get on top of it unless we get an army of people to work with us to achieve it. Councillor Wilton, do you want to say something again?
Yeah, something I had written down, I didn't bring up. High quality soils to me is a bit of a misnomer, because we get into a situation that we're not actually allowed to produce what we want to produce on the soils. We're limited on what we can. It's something that probably hasn't come up, but it's so it's just something to be aware of, that it's probably a bit of tongue in cheek, but I still want to bring it up anyway. By the amount of rules we've got and what we can produce, we're actually being hindered and we can't get the full value out of our high quality soils.
That's probably a question you need to put to regional council, not to us.
Still needs to be said.
No, that's all right. I don't mind. All right, Councillor Maguire, you got a question, or have you just left your hand up?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay. Audio team, let's move on to the next set of slides then.
And it's really just one slide, isn't it, Donna? It's this one you'll be talking through.
2 slides, Jim.
Okay.
One you're talking to, one's got pretty pictures on it, mate.
That's just a slide if someone came up. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Yep. So on the 19th of October, we had a government announcement for the Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Amendment Bill. The bill is proposed to enable medium density to be built as a right, 3 dwellings per site, and we take site as, we're not sure whether that means allotment or certificate of title, and they could be 3 stories high. The bill proposes in its current state that this would apply to Tier 1 territorial authorities, of which is Waikato District, and it would apply to Tier 1 urban environments. So that's another tier level under the NPS that sits below your initial tier status. So we have one of our townships that fall within a tier 1 urban environment, and that township is Ngaruawahia. And that's because it's by association of being part of the Hamilton City urban environment. So our initial thoughts at this stage is that this bill may apply to Ngaruawahia, but not anywhere else in our district. In future proof, where we outline those tier levels a bit more, we had signalled that Pokeno and Tuakau could be considered as part of the Auckland tier 1 urban environment. So if we were to say yes they are, then this bill may also apply to those 2 townships. So that's something that staff are working through at the moment, and I guess we'd like to seek feedback on whether we want to push to have Ngaruawahia included as a tier 1 urban environment, or highlight in our submission we don't think it should apply to Ngaruawahia. So we're also working through some of the other implications. This bill allows medium density to be the default residential zone. So it would replace the residential zone where it applies, and it would all be medium density. 3 dwellings on a site, 3 stories high. Some of the concerns we have relate to those amenity outcomes. So your building height ratio, building plane, outdoor living court, daylight hours. Remembering that we have already got rid of all of our parking provisions. That was something that all councils had to do to meet our NPS. So certainly lots of issues to consider or think about. And we'd like to make our submission quite short, sharp and concise to really highlight the key issues for the Waikato district. It's very tight time frame. Submissions close on the 12th of November. So we're looking to have a draft with you on Tuesday next week, so that you can have a look, provide your comments. There's time for staff to incorporate those, so that we can meet the submission deadline.
Is that it?
Yeah, open for
Just
Take the screen down, Donna.
I would just say that I would just add to that to say that what I've seen other councils' responses as so far is that even those councils that have been very pro-density, very much at the forefront of trying to strengthen centers by getting density around transport nodes and things, are coming out and saying, well, hold on, you wanted us to focus on our centers, improve our CBDs, et cetera. How's that going to happen if that demand is just flattened out across a whole district or a whole city? And how do you provide incentives to ensure that those centers, town centers, are a vibrant place? So I know you would have seen possibly Hamilton City's press release on that. And that's, I think that's consistent from what I've seen from other areas where it's sort of like, well, we wanted density, but this is, you know, this is getting a bit out of control, potentially. We'll see.
Yeah, so basically, Jim, when Mr. Parker rang me in the morning before the announcement, I said to him, that's all good and great, but I would envisage this style of density of housing or apartments, whatever you want to call the things, more akin to being within easy walking distance of a transport hub, being at a rail platform or a bus terminus or something like that, but not scattered across a town. I know, talking to the Mayor of Hamilton, she's not happy with it because it could pop up anywhere in Hamilton based on the current rules, opposed to it being somewhere around the rail platform or around the city centre, bus centre there, or whatever they call it, transport hub. And those are the places this should have been targeted for. And we've always known that within a 900 metre walking distance, I think it is a preferred zone for these types of things. But they've just pancake this across to all of us. And I can see some not necessarily good developers buying the old quarter-acre section somewhere in Ngaruawahia and actually starting to build these things from one side of town to the other. So yeah, I'm concerned about that. Maybe Councillor Patterson and Gib have got a view on it.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Ellen. Look, I'm not supportive of this medium density in Ngaruawahia. It's been something that is, like general conversation that through the community boards over the years is that, we don't want to see multi-level residential buildings in our town. There is plenty of growth happening as it is, and it's still pretty well contained, and it just doesn't fit the fit of Ngaruawahia. So yeah, I'm not that supportive of that. The closest I'd like to see, which I think would be happening, would be at Horatuat Te Awa Lakes. I think that they've definitely caught multi-level housing there.
Councillor Gibb.
I'm just going to say I can't comment. It would be inappropriate, since I'm a commissioner on making these decisions, because that's also on our agenda, even though
decision on this one, there is no decision to make.
No, but medium density
zones.
I'm sorry, Alan, medium density zones are in part of our decision making as well. And I know this is something different, but I best not comment.
Yeah, that's right. I don't mind you not commenting, but just be clear that any decision making has been taken out of our hands if we accept this. That's all I'm saying. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, so just to be a little bit provocative, I suppose, devil's advocate, are we saying we don't like the idea of these popping up willy-nilly, and fair enough, but where it does meet that sort of criteria, Malin, that you talked about, where it is close to a public transport centre, and we've got potentially a railway station coming in Turkau, everyone hopes. We certainly have one in Huntly. We have some public transport in Ngaruawahia. Are we willing to consider, with some additional criteria that it is around amenities like that, or are we just saying blanket no?
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, can I just be provocative and say why not at Ngaruawahia? The reality is, I might not like it right now, Councillor Patterson, but the reality is there's developers, there's people out there who may choose to live, and many of us have travelled overseas. And in some countries, like I was in Scandinavia some years ago, it's practically all multi-storey tenanted apartments, not as many ownership as opposed to tenants. So, we're talking about the here and now and our own personal values, but I just wonder whether, and seeing as how you put me with your lovely town in the future for voting, I'd rather all the development in the high rise was up to the north, so that my son doesn't get blocked, and let it all happen in your town. So without but not being flippant, I just say why not? And the reality is you can't really say no. So that
hang on, everybody. Hang on, Councillor Patterson.
All right, I'll leave it at that.
Something first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Patterson.
All right, I've finished.
I'd just like to point out we did receive a submission requesting medium density residential development. It came from Kāinga Ora, and they were submitting to have medium density in all 6 of our towns. The planners section 42 report supported that medium density. It was identified in preferred locations around our CBDs and public transport areas. It was also what we identified and signalled in Waikato 2070. So I think generally that's something that we have already signalled as a council that we support, because it's in our growth strategy. I think the difference is that we propose where it should be located rather than the blanket everywhere approach. That's probably the key differences. There will be some differences in the proposed provisions that the bill sets out compared to the provisions that were put forward in the Section 40 Trade Planners report on medium density, but they are very similar. There's subtle differences between them. So I just wanted to note that we have already signalled that we support medium density in our growth strategy, and that also could be an outcome of our proposed district plan. But it is targeted areas, definitely not the blanket approach where it can occur everywhere.
And I think the one thing you must remember, it's another tool in affordability is medium density to high density. So Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. Look, Councillor Smith, I don't disagree with you, but I look at what's happening now in Ngāruawāhia. So I think that our community board, I think as a councillor, I thought our minimum lot size was 450 squares. Just down the road from me, there's some development happening where there's 53 or 52 houses going in, and those smaller sections are about 190 square metres. And so you could fit two of those sections just about under my house roof. It's that small. And what's happening also is down the road, there is 8 houses and 1 driveway built now, and those houses are honestly very, very tiny, and there's no section space at all. And there's obviously a couple of families in amongst there, and those kids are playing out in the driveway or even on the road because there is no parks and reserves around this area for them to go and play at, and there's no back lawns for them. So there's already a lot of intensification happening, which is in some ways not that flash. And I think the type of development that was called, Donna, is some where it goes to turnkey, where the developer builds the houses in turnkey, so that allows them to get that density or something. I was quite surprised by it actually. But
multi-unit residential development. That's a good point. And a couple of the key things that we want to highlight is if it goes through and we allow all of this development to occur, do we still have sufficient open space for our community members to hang out in and do things in? And then also obviously the infrastructure. So if every site suddenly does this development, can they all plug into our existing network and it be okay?
Yeah.
So,
ghettos.
And Councillor Patterson, you've got a nice front lawn, so you can put a playground on that for your local kids.
Yeah, Alan, I'm not advocating ghettos, I can assure you of that.
I don't think any of us will advocate that or want that, to be honest. Councillor Maguire.
Yeah, well, I have a big problem with high density and medium density because the streets are cluttered with cars and they look terrible and they're narrow, get narrower and narrower, and they become one-way streets. And we've got, as Councillor Patterson has indicated, there's nowhere for the kids to play or do anything. So they might be right around transport hubs, but what I see in Hamilton and what I've seen overseas is just dreadful. It's just not on in my view. I think we're making a right for our own back, and Hamilton's certainly doing that, going down the path of that, because there's cars to Africa and there's no room for anything. So I totally disagree with us going down that path.
Yeah, look, and I don't disagree with you. Any of you that might know a street that I use as a bit of a shortcut sometimes is Stanley Street in Hamilton. God, you play dodgems when you go down that street now because, 2 cars on the road you can't get past.
That's
all right. I think what Donna's looking for is a bit of a steer as to whether I think we probably need to put a submission in, definitely put a submission into it. I would suggest that we actually, so we don't look out of place in relation to what's proposed in our district plan, that we actually still support it, but within certain, for the likes of Ngāruawāhia, it needs to be in an appropriate place if it's going to be identified as it, and it needs to be in not scattered across Ngāruawāhia. Last thing I'd want to see is a whole lot of three-story buildings on one side of town and go across the other side because people have found little gaps to put them in. If you're going to do it, we actually do it based on first principles, being around a certain distance from a transport hub, and try and do that to at least corral it, because I don't think we're going to stop it. And to be honest, I don't think they'll probably take a lot of notice of any submissions. I think they've made their mind up, as they have done with most things, and I'll just plough ahead. But it doesn't hurt to send a message either around trying to refine it for us too.
Mayor Allen, just another comment there is that, this medium density housing can go on top of retail and commercial, as you know, and in town centers in particular, allowing for that, then it's not, then you don't have to say, oh, well, where do we put the medium density housing? The building's already there. You potentially have the height that could flex into office maybe someday, or it could be residential. So, excuse me, Mike.
That's cool. Right, Councillor Lynch.
Yes, you have that a perfect example at TK, Your Worship. Some of those little houses that don't have a back section, there's nowhere for the kids to play and there's no parks around there and they're not close to town.
I know, but at the end of the day.
Yeah, but that's a perfect example, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an example, but unfortunately, this is what they're trying to do with this piece of policy is to actually, in a way, attack that affordable housing issue.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's been a huge amount of pushback in places up in Auckland where it would be probably better for it to go, but it's a bit of NIMBYism comes in, not in my backyard sort of thing. It's pushed it away. I know it was a big part of the Auckland regional plan that got pushed back dramatically by a lot of people. A lot of people thought it was great until they found out it was on their doorstep, and then all of a sudden they didn't like it so much anymore. So Jim, where to? That it?
Well, I think we're through our slides. That last slide was just in case anyone wanted to have a refresher on the RM reform, but it's there in your slide pack anyway to look at. That's still coming. And unfortunately, you think you start preparing for one round of change, and then another thing comes in over the top. So we're rolling with the punches as best we can and trying to keep you guys informed. So yeah, thank you guys. Okay.
And you're doing a pretty good job of it too, to the team. But look, like you, I get waves of changes and stuff come through to me, and I struggle to keep up with myself, only because I find other stuff more interesting to read than some of this other dry stuff that comes out of a government department. So I do pass it over quite regularly to someone else to do it. And I'm pleased to know that you and the team and Donna and Adco are doing that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks for that. Clive.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to clarify or test the conversation we had on the clean air activity at Taupiri. That conversation, we didn't quite land whether you wanted us to lift the priority of that work or leave it at a priority 3.
I would be reluctant to drop something else to do that just at the moment. I think everything else ahead of that is a priority, and I just so what would you drop off to do that? That's what I'm saying to you. And I think because we are short of resources, I think we need to deal with what we've got, and that is a priority. I don't think the Taupiri thing will be that forthcoming in the next year or two, but I think it will come eventually as it grows, and that opportunity. The fact is we've identified it as an opportunity. I'm sure some developer will look at that and say, I've just seen something council's quite keen on doing, and perhaps pick it up.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim, Donna, Sandra, the team.
Thank you. I'll circulate something on Tuesday based on our conversation for the housing supply bill for you all. I know timeframes are tight, so I think would be looking to have comments back by that Friday for us to incorporate your feedback into the submission.
No, that's all right. That's all right, Donna. No problem. Okay. So do we have another workshop?
There's a dog control and bylaw one scheduled for.
That's the one. What time is that scheduled for?
It's for 2:30. I don't
So
know
if
if any of
everybody
the.
wants to go and grab a cup of coffee, I'm back here in 10 minutes and we'll get the dogs done. Don't go and let the dogs out.